Oh, it's you again.
I missed you, Cloud Continent.
Well, now you're literally like a clown now, aren't you?
Here's the new villain. We beat the new villain. We move on. Here's the new villain. We beat the new villain. We move on. Here's the new villain. We beat the new villain. We move on. Here's the new villain. We beat the new villain. We move on. Here's the new villain. We beat the new villain. We move on.
Run. Welcome to Podagus, your friendly 8-legged dog bus companion through the 2020 Digimon Adventure reboot. This week we're discussing episode 48, The Attack of Mugendramon. I'm your host, Jeff Ruberg, and for my guest this week, I'm excited to welcome back Aster.
Hey! Thank you for having me back.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you back. I'm curious what you thought about the episode since you were last on, the Metal Garurumon episode, the Holy Angemon episode, and the Nohamon episode.
Well, a lot sure happened at that time. The Metal Garurumon one was mostly, I think I lost my ability to have an objective view of that because my Zero Two themed group chat was constantly memeing on two things. One, the fact that Mahmon had the same voice actor as Blackmore Greymon, so we were like completely unable to disentangle that. Just like the same voice having like angsting about things all the time. And then the other thing was that like the live like the Ikeda thing is like parallels between episode 26 of Zero Two and like all that. So I old series minded brain cannot like unhook from that, so that was good.
And that's the episode 26 is the one where Daisuke is telling Ken to live, is that right?
Well, because Ken was like in retrospect this might have gotten downplayed in the dub a bit, but like Ken was like, everything is like, I'm trying to help but nothing's helping, so I'm going to just like chuck myself into this reactor to stop it, and I don't care if I die. And so like Daisuke is like, no, don't do that. So that was kind of like the so-called parallels, but other than that, it's completely different. So it was just like for the purpose of memeing. Holy Angemon episode was the really funny part was like people who didn't even know Persona 4 were going like, is this just Persona 4? Like during the whole thing, which is basically Persona 4 specifically, like the plot was entirely about like accepting the dark side of yourself as like a true part of yourself. That is like the whole premise of the plot. So
I haven't played any Persona games. My understanding was of like Persona and Shin Megami Tensei in general that like I assume it all boils down to like light versus dark in the end. So
there's a lot of it. Also, like Digimon is like latently kind of a kid-friendly ripoff of Shin Megami Tensei in some form. So it's but yeah, that was just so I feel like it was interesting because I definitely was not expecting that plot swerve. It's an interesting concept. What they do with it will also be interesting. But Noamon episode was just like, I think they were just, you know, as I was mentioned on the podcast last week, it didn't actually advance anything. But the part I was actually kind of appreciating during the first half of that episode is the banter between the partner and the human. That is something that I'm saying this because I'm very close friends with a couple fanfic writers, and one thing they will tell you is that writing the Digimon is one of the hardest parts of it, specifically because you have to like float this balance of like the Digimon is not like a pet. Like it's bad if they're just a talking pet. They have to be someone who can like banter you almost like a Manzai sketch, and that is a very difficult balance to strike, in that this is a series that makes you kind of like, you have to want to have a partner, otherwise the whole thing kind of falls through. But we kind of like, I kind of was watching this, like they kind of did a really good job making them like play off each other. And that's something that actually is very like, your mileage may vary per series. So I kind of appreciated that like whoever is like writing the comedy or like the lighter scenes and stuff is actually like doing a pretty good job of it. So I had to give them props for that.
Do you think that was particularly strong in the Nohamon episode? Like Taichi and Agumon were split up for most of the episode, right?
Yeah, but we had like poor Jo and Gomon being like stuck there, like lawyering.
Yeah, I guess they weren't in the same scenes together, but like they were in contrast with each other. So they basically were playing against each other.
Yeah, and when they are next to each other, especially in the earlier episodes, like the banter is particularly good. So that was one thing I especially because the original series, there was like a very strong psychological link between like the human and the partner. Here, that's not as much, but it still does have decent banter. So that part is like, okay, that's good.
Yeah, I guess like, is it kind of fair to say that like in the original series, it felt more like the partner was like the like subtextual reading of the partner being a side of the kid's subconscious?
Yeah, that was
a
like
bit stronger.
Yeah. Well, I mean, also they're like very going out of their way to establish these like Digimon partners as like existing before their partnership with the human, which still brings up a lot of questions, but nevertheless that is a thing. So
Yeah. Well, on that note, let's jump on a Commandamon and I guess get blasted by a giant laser into this week's episode. Episode 48, The Attack of Mugendramon, aka Taichi Goes Baichi. Aka Taichi is the new Leomon.
more like he sacrificed himself for Leomon's existence.
Yeah, one person, Leomon showed up in the episode and one person had to die. So
it's called equivalent exchange.
But yeah, spoiler policy for this week. It's going to be typical spoiler policy, talking about everything in Crunchyroll episode, including the title and preview for next week, and Adventure in 02. But the big addition this week is that there are a lot of similarities between things that happen in this episode and particular events in Digimon Adventure Tri. So
5 and 6 specifically.
That will probably be discussed. So if you have not seen Tri, sorry. I'm not sure I would say go watch all of Tri before listening to this episode. So if you haven't seen it yet, you probably don't care about spoilers.
You've probably heard about it by this point, to be honest.
That's true, yeah.
I feel like most people have probably brought this up.
Yeah, and there are still titles and synopses for episodes 50 and 51. But if we talk about those, we'll do it at the very end of the podcast and give you a warning before that.
I may have words about that.
Oh, cool. All right, so this week, Koshiro gets a call from Leomon. Everyone's reunited on Eldoradimon somehow and for some reason, and the kids realize they've arrived at Faga. Cloud Continent starts falling. Vedamon, I think it starts falling or starts approaching them. Something. Vedamon hacks into their Zoom call. Mugendramon appears and tries to shoot down Cloud Continent, and then the kids try to stop Mugendramon, but they're powerless until Wargreymon and Metal Gurumon come in. Hikari and Angelomon's light buffs Wargreymon, so Taichi proclaims that he'll take Mugendramon alone, and Yamato should lead everyone else. And then Wargreymon slowly tears Wargreymon slowly tears Mugendramon apart, but Vedamon activates Mugendramon's final suicide bomb and launches Taichi and Wargreymon into Cloud Continent, where they explode and are gone for good.
Dun.
And Hikari looks a little sad.
A little.
a little concerningly not as big a reaction as I expected. But I guess there's lots of things to talk about this week.
Oh,
what
yeah.
were your general impressions?
Obviously, as soon as I heard that this is going to be about Taichi potentially dying, like, the fear reflex just kicked up in me. So it was actually okay in the end. Like, the thing is that, like, as much as everybody is tempted to bring up Tri, which I think is a reasonable comparison because it was recent and all that, and also because of, like, the Hikari thing also makes you think of the things that happened in succession there. I actually was also thinking of the original adventure, which is back in episode 20, which is when everyone, like, when he was doing his last stand with the Metal Greymon against Edamon, and he got, like, blown into the sky. And, like, it wasn't, for the audience, it wasn't ambiguous that he obviously survived that. We actually saw him, like, 2 seconds later in the real world. But for the kids, for several months he was missing, and they were having a debate over whether he was dead or not. And then they even split up over it. So it was a lot about, like, the emotional reaction they had to that and how it impacted them. And that was actually what kind of got brought to mind, because like it split them apart pretty badly. Like, we didn't get to see the brunt of it, but it, you know, made it so that when Taichi came back, he had to do, like, a whole fetch quest to bring them back together because of how badly it shook them. Obviously, this is not, like, smack in the middle of the series anymore, so the context is completely different, but it did kind of, like, remind me of that. Especially because they actually built this up as, like, a thing that is actually very dangerous and has the potential to kill him. Like, they even have, like, that whole scene of, like, you better come back safe. So, like, everybody acknowledges that this is a threat that had, like, the potential to completely kill him. And so, of course, when they saw it that way, and then when he, like, explodes, they're like, oh, he did. Like, it was their expectation that he might, like, actually die in this. So, of course, you understand, like, if you see someone get yeeted up into the air and explode, you're gonna think that, like, okay, that did it. And especially because it is to Mugendramon, who is supposed to be portrayed as a very, you know, particularly frightening enemy. I'm saying this on behalf of my friend who is a diehard Mugendramon fan and is very upset if he is done dirty and not shown as sufficiently threatening. So I hope this episode made them happy. But yeah, it is something that is supposed to be, like, shown as a threat. and particularly like able to decimate you in only like one beam. So I think like the thing is, for us as the audience, we all know that he's not going to die. I'm sure the kids know this too, you know. But so it's kind of like you do have to climb that hurdle of like selling this when we all know this is not going to happen. But the way you have to compensate is to make everyone else's emotional reactions kind of like proportionate. And in this case, they definitely like played this up for a whole episode. And like some people have pointed out how vicious this battle was, so I think that aside, I think I can give it props for that. I really liked that like shot with like the silhouettes of like Mugendramon on one side and Wargreymon on the other, which is like the one that like even like Watanabe Genji even drew. So I think a lot of people had like a strong impression of that shot in particular. But they even sold the battle too. They timed the like insert song really well. They made it like all hype and stuff. So I was just like, you know what? Okay, I'll take this.
Yeah, I think like on some level the selling of the threat of the consequences battle, like I'm pretty conflicted about it, and like I'm torn in lots of different directions because like I think fundamentally having the kids riding the Digimon makes this kind of threat seem more out of left field, or like,
Yeah.
you know, kind of like if this really was possible all along, then like the fact that they were riding on the Digimon felt like a thing you would only do in universe if this wasn't possible.
Right.
But also the other thing that pulls me is that like the way I'm trying to remember exactly how it's executed in Original Adventure, the scene you're talking about, or the end of episode 20 you're talking about. Doesn't episode 20 end with Taichi waking up in Odaiba?
Right. So it was never like ambiguous to the audience that he's like, did he survive that or not? Like,
right.
We were actually following his perspective more than the other kids. But then when he got back, we realized like from the perspective of the other kids, they like legitimately thought he could be dead.
Which I think that I really in retrospect I appreciate that framing a lot, because it's like it's not trying to convince the audience that he's dead. It's just you later learn the consequence of and how it would have been realistic to think he's dead. And I see how this framing instead, where we don't follow his perspective, we follow everyone else's perspective, I see how it is a bigger like action spectacle kind of moment. It's like, you know, like if you're trying to sell the bombastic nature of the series, which is what the show has always been doing, like it makes sense. But it's a little disappointingly shallow when we know the consequence.
I think it'll also depend on the next episode as well, because even the original adventure, it wasn't that they all thought he was dead. They were actually conflicted about whether to think he was dead, because there was like there was like a camp that was thinking like we should just give it up, and like we are just like chasing like nothing, and then the other camp that was like, I don't want to give up, like I think he may have survived that, so we need to try harder. And like it was actually like a split, like I don't know what to think, but like is it worth keeping this up, because it was like months for them. So for the next episode, we are hopefully going to be treated more to like the actual emotional reaction and like how everyone is going to like deal with this, because there's like a huge difference between like I don't know how to read that versus okay, we're just gonna like throw in the towel.
Yeah, I am very intrigued to see how the fallout is going to be handled, but I am, after Try and the way Try handled it, I'm worried. Especially because I feel like I think I generally have been enjoying the reboot more than I generally enjoyed Try, even though I think Try was trying to be something completely different and was ambitious in lots of different ways. But like I trust the reboot's handling of
sensitively, I guess.
Yeah, sensitivity, but also like character interactions and emotional thoughts less. So
you know, I have to say that like the interpretation of Hikari having a brother complex is one of the single like ways to piss me off. I'm sorry to say this. So like at this point my bar has like dropped really low. Because that was like anybody who like was watching her closely in the original series knew that was like a serious exaggeration, or even misinterpretation by some standards. So it was like, even if it's a new universe, like I don't want to see that. And so like I'm just watching, like, is her reaction proportionately reasonable to the fact that he's like, you know, literally her brother? It's like has been like on my mind this entire time, and I'm like watching like the preview for the next episode, like, does this look reasonable, or are they going to turn this into some kind of brother complex fetish thing?
Yeah, I generally just like completely block out the thought of brother complex stuff. So like even maybe things that people would otherwise get icked out by, I like it doesn't exist. No, that reading is doesn't exist in my mind.
It's because, like, when Tribe first started being a thing, and so they put it on Crunchyroll for the first time, and so this was a lot of people's first exposure to like adventure in Japanese. And literally, one of the first comments I saw on the bottom was like, "Oh, she calls him Oni-chan now," and I just wanted to die. I was just like, we're gonna be dealing with this for like the next how many years now?
Yeah, I guess that's getting dragged down by some other series that give it a reputation.
I'm just like sitting here like, I really hope this does not reflect badly on the original version of the character, because she was so much more than that.
Yeah, it also doesn't help that there was that whole joking interview that people cite seriously and about episode 21, but I don't even want to give that time of day. I think
Yeah.
it's been taken out of context and is not what people. It works for clickbait, and I don't like that.
So anyway, this is a kids anime, so like I'm really hoping, please be reasonable about this.
But yeah, I'm one of the. When we're talking about like the way that the kids like were split and unsure what was happening with Taichi in the original adventure. It has been a while now since I've seen that part of Try, but one thing I remember finding particularly frustrating was how ambiguous the Taichi's quote unquote death was, as how ambiguous it was to the viewer, but how all of the characters in universe, I feel like unilaterally treated it like he was dead. And I was just like,
it's like, you have flying Digimon, couldn't you like check?
Yeah, like there's a big chasm, like
wasn't falling off a cliff the first thing they did in Adventure?
and like repeatedly over and over again. And so yeah, I hope that there is some confusion and like or like discrepancy, like they disagree with what happened and there's some ambiguity.
Even if it's not necessarily disagreeing with each other, if you just say like, I don't know what to think, like that alone feels a lot more reasonable, I think.
Yeah.
Because like exploding is definitely pretty brutal looking.
Yeah.
I will say, like exploding in midair, like that would require. I'm like saying it like it's some huge hurdle when it's probably going to be something like this. But like it would require like Lotmon intervening or something. Like it is going to require some like very significant amount of intervention to like survive that.
Maybe. I mean, one thing that I didn't really notice until my second watch of the episode was that because the first time I was swept up in the emotion, like I think
he died.
We jumped to the whole dying thing, but like the episode, like the fight was really dramatic. It was really well executed and stuff. But I didn't realize until my second watch that like there's no reason for Taichi and Mugendramon to stay on the rocket. Like they could just jump off, and like I assume what they're going for is that they're trying to prevent it from crashing into the continent. But like I don't think them being on the rocket does anything to prevent that. So I felt like knowing was going to happen this time, like second watch, I was like, why are they not jumping off? What's going on? Like, this seems silly.
Maybe we'll find out in the next episode or the episode after, or next time we see them, which we definitely are.
What I'm worried about is like my most pessimistic expectation is that they're just gonna the twist is going to be that they just jumped off the last minute, and I hope it's not that simple.
The Lotmon intervention is my friend's theory, so I kind of stole that from her.
I mean, I think that would be satisfying. It just reminds me a little bit of in One Piece chapter 900. There was like there's been a couple big One Piece moments that lined up with 100 chapters. Like
yeah.
I forget exactly. There's like I think chapter 100 is a big turning point in the series, and I think 400 or so there's one big like reveal of a new power in another X 100 chapter. So in chapter 900 there's this big like they've all died. And it's like, okay. And then the next chapter is like, oh, but not actually, they survived. And like the reason for it is it feels pretty contrived and kind of silly.
Yeah.
So I hope this is handled better than that. I was a little bit frustrated by the timing of Taichi like loudly proclaiming that he's gonna stay behind and fight Mugendramon, because like he does it right after he's been buffed by Angelomon, right? And Mugendramon is powerful enough to at that point like go toe to toe with Mugendramon and like basically defeat him. And so it was like, why? Like, there's basically no reason for Taichi needing to sacrifice himself and stay behind until it's revealed that okay, he's going to do like a final suicide bomb, and Taichi and Mugendramon need to be on the bomb for some reason.
I thought it just generally had to do with like one of those like Gandalf like you shall not pass things, where like he understand that they're going to need like as much of a surviving army as much as possible.
Which, I mean, I think that makes sense. It's just awkward timing.
So I think like also he kind of like, because it was such a threatening battle, he had a feeling he may not live even regardless of like explosions.
Yeah, that makes sense. It comes off a little off to me when it's like he just got this new power and he hasn't even tested. Well, Greymon hasn't even tested how
Yeah,
strong
that's
he is with
fair.
the new power, and then it's like, oh, he's decimating Mugendramon. It's like, oh, should you say like, oh, never mind, don't leave. Like, I'm fine, I got this. I mean, in the scheme of things, that's not that big of a deal, but it's a little bit of awkward writing.
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting how like they're making this big deal how like they've arrived at Faga now, but there's no big visual landmark. It's just kind of like, oh, we're in an open field. Oh, and Tailmon saying we're here.
There was something about like Faga emerging, right? So I think like it has to come out first. They're like at the location, but it hasn't like emerged yet.
Yeah, the big open field reminded me of the concept of the calm lands from Final Fantasy X. That idea has stuck with me for a while because it's like a really they didn't spell it out for Millennium in this show, but like I could see it being a similar idea that like where this last huge battle was fought ended up destroying the land completely, but because the land was completely destroyed, it regrew and with like completely flat and peaceful and so like, you see it and it looks like it's like, oh, calm and nice. And it's like, oh, because this is actually where a brutal battle was fought.
Right.
Which is a cool concept. What did you think about, what was your read on like where Cloud Continent was coming from?
I think I was just mostly caught up in, oh, it's you again. Like,
I missed you, Cloud Continent.
Well, now you're literally like a cloud now, aren't you?
Yeah, like I kind of assumed before when they like after they fell off the continent, I assumed they were like towards the edge of it. And that they then like when they were on other Digimon in the water, like physically moved away from it, and it was like nowhere near them anymore, like horizontally. And so I like when it first showed up again, I was like, did it just like fly horizontally like thousands of miles or something?
Well, I don't know about thousands of miles, but I guess like most so far they've been mainly making their transportation on a dog, right?
Yeah.
And then like if the whole continent moves kind of like a literal cloud, then like it could probably move pretty far distances because like clouds move pretty far.
That's true.
Like I don't think the dog is going very fast in the long scheme of things.
Yeah, that's true. One thing I was wondering is like maybe it just is supposed to be maybe it's supposed to have been above them the whole time, but like maybe far enough above that they didn't really see it, and then it just fell down. But if that was the case, I'm not sure how the sun would work.
Yeah.
But I guess it's the digital world, so it could just be weird and not make sense.
Not be the first time.
Yeah. But I guess it only seemed notable because like I'm not sure if we're supposed to understand where Aldoradimon is, like because Aldoradimon also seems to be under threat of the continent falling on them, and I'm just like, is Aldoradimon nearby or just somewhere? It was nice to see Lopmon again, though. I missed Lopmon.
It is nice to see like the actual sense of recurring characters, so you understand that like the that like the things they visited are building up to something. Like they were talking about like the Woodmon and the Lopmon, and even Leomon and pals come back and that kind of thing.
I kind of wonder if like maybe this was the reason that like all of those kind of like NPC Digimon that could come back in this fashion didn't really appear until recently in the show, was maybe because if they had appeared before episode 30 or so, that they would have been on a totally different continent and we would have had to explain how they got to a different one.
That is also fair.
Yeah, and I guess Leomon and his resistance fighters predated the other continent, but we saw them come down with them, right? So
yeah, and like in the original adventure, when we saw like returning like NPC Digimon, like the Dark Masters literally had to like warp the entire landscape of the digital world for it to be even possible to meet them, which was treated as a bad thing because it's like, what are you doing here?
Although I guess it wouldn't have been too hard to say, like, considering our protagonists fell off the continent with no explanation, they could have said, oh, they fell off, don't worry about it. But I liked how just the way that Vedamon framed, like, I mean, so I think it's cool how they've kind of like, with this introduction to Mugendramon, they're kind of like backing into Millenniumon.
Yeah.
Like it seems like whenever they show Millenniumon, it's not like literal, if you look up Millenniumon and Wikimon, it's like Zed Millenniumon's form, it seems. Which isn't as explicitly a combination of Mugendramon and Chimeramon.
Right.
So that's kind of neat that like they're starting like the past version was Millenniumon, and this new one is going to be, I guess, the base form that looks like a hybrid of.
And like they hinted at the part that like they're scanning like all of the Digimon's data and like hoping to make something out of it put together, which is also behind Chimeramon. So like there's definitely hints at going at that direction.
Yeah, and I think it's pretty cool to use Sephirothmon for that.
Yeah.
That's like it's a neat way to like tie in different parts of Digimon lore that haven't ever been connected before, but make sense to be connected.
Right.
Yeah, that's cool. I think in the preview we saw like a picture of, or like a shot of Sephirothmon in Millenniumon's crystal.
It was something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a striking visual considering there's lots of visuals of the Sephiroth in that intimidating pose. How did you feel about the like glimpse that we saw of Yamato reflecting on seeing Mugendramon before?
So he's like seems to be the one who lucidly remembers that thing, because even Taichi himself doesn't remember that.
Right. Like, were you satisfied with that, or?
I don't know if I was satisfied with it, but at the same time, like I don't know if I was satisfied. But when I was thinking about it harder, I'm also like, I don't know what Yamato should be saying either. Like I don't know if he should have anything to say beyond that, because he doesn't understand what's going on either. So it's like, should he have more interesting thoughts on this? Because he's also like, what the hell?
I think at first I was kind of like frustrated with how inconsequential it was, and it was just kind of like there was no point to him remembering it. But then I thought about some more, and it's like, what does it really matter for the way the show is framing it? Like, Vedamon has said that this data came from them, that Vedamon was inspired by like this combat data of the or of the warrior Digimon, whatever. And so like I think as from the viewer standpoint, we've gotten all the connections we need to piece together like, okay, they're making Mugendramon from this recollection of Mugendramon before, and basically completing Mugendramon. I don't know that like Yamato telling Taichi, oh yeah, remember that time you got eaten, like this is like a completed version of that. Like it doesn't need to be said in universe.
It's probably going to make him feel worse, really. Like, look what you did. You just helped them. Wait, not just, but like you helped them a long time ago by doing this.
Yeah, that's what when Taichi said that he would stay behind and Yamato should go off and like lead everyone, Yamato should have been like, yeah, I agree, because this is your fault. Like, your problem, you should deal with it.
Oh, that's mean.
But yeah, I also don't know if like it fits for the kind of show this is trying to be. Like, I kind of lament, it would be nice if this were the type of show where this War Greymon versus Mugendramon battle was one of Taichi reflecting on his past and like his mistakes and learning from them and like addressing his inner demons.
Right.
Which like it's weird because it's like it is doing that like kind of like, I don't want to say subtextual, like it's taking like it's representing that in this bombastic form,
right,
but without any actual character introspection. That's just the MO for the series.
Yeah,
I guess.
it is.
So that's fine.
Yes.
But it made me sad that like usually that is the
expectation, kind of. Yeah, like that's the expectation you have usually.
But yeah, I don't know if there's any way that would have made sense with how things have been set up.
Yeah.
So let's move on to some 3 reviews. Okay, so first off from Andrew Softman, Draymond Ball GT.
Andy Lucas OE, incoming Ofanima fall down mode. I see you putting that hyphen, trying to cheat and make that.
Yeah, trying to sneak in an extra word there.
I see you.
I mean, even fall down, is it officially one word?
It is. That is officially one word. But
okay.
I don't know about that last part.
I mean, fall down mode is kind of 3 words. Next one from Dak and Jackster. I think they intend this to be pronounced negate the infinity.
Yep.
Negate with an infinity sign on its side. As the 8 in, yeah.
Because of skate the infinity, yeah.
Yep.
Bored individual, like an onion.
Yeah, I did not get that they included a clip, the clip of the dub when, in the English dub, when I guess when War Greymon has devolved back into Koromon and then claims that he cut up Mugendramon like an onion. I
haven't watched the dub in a really long time, so I appreciate it when people remind me what the context is. I do remember the clip though, so.
Yeah, I did not remember. I was like, what is this? What in this episode is like peeling like an onion? And then, okay, that scene is certainly interesting in the dub. So, at Ravid Millenniumon, Taichi Yamato spun.
At Golden Pelt, underwhelming boss battle.
At Oryuken Alphamon, Leomon not dead.
At CC Takato, not shy again. Oh.
Yeah, that's our the way that Hikari reacts when seeing Taichi die. That's us seeing Try happen again in front of our eyes. At NNM Podcast, Age of Ultramon.
At Jayshan26, I hope I pronounced your name right. Battle damage hype.
Yeah, that was really well executed. And Austin LC23, Mugendramon, the mannequin.
At Lucas Kukas, I miss Lopmon. I did too.
Yeah, he was nice to see. Or they were nice to see. I don't, who's the voice actor?
Same one as Cross Wars, I believe.
And at CRR McRae, Taichi got nuked.
He sure did. At Joseph Snowsef, so no head?
This one I also didn't get, but they included the image of Mugendramon's head falling off. And also, apparently there was a Vine meme from years ago of someone upset that they... you can find the Vine. I'll link to the Vine. I shouldn't explain what the Vine is about on this children-friendly program. But yeah, let's move on to listener comments and questions. First off, from at AustinLC23. So this episode kind of leaves me with an idea of why episode 47 was placed where it was. They wanted time to pass between Sephirothmon absorbing the data and Machinedramon appearing.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah. That makes sense. I think another angle that makes sense is that, like, if Holy Angemon is supposed to be a big deal when they show up, it makes sense for it not to be literally the next episode.
Yeah.
Doesn't really excuse the kind of, like, the audience finding the pacing weird, but yeah, ideally you would solve for those kind of parameters while also not making people find it odd. But anyway, the second comment from Austin LC23. One of the characters mentioned Cloud Continent having lots of Digimon, but if I recall correctly, we didn't meet many friendly Mons during the Cloud Continent episodes, besides Leomon and Co. and Nemon and Co. Ironically, most of the Digimon we've met that the audience/characters would be likely to care about are on Eternal Continent and from the recent Sven episodes.
Yeah, I like, we just said just now that, like, it seems like the kind of like the most recent group of, like, Digimon are like the ones that they're bringing back.
Mm-hmm. But I think it makes sense that, like, Cloud Continent being destroyed, I don't think it's supposed to be just about the Digimon on the continent being at risk.
If it smashes down onto everyone, that's, like, generally speaking, I think, a whole continent crashing down is probably kind of not a situation you want.
Right, it seems like it'd be cataclysmic for both continents.
I will say, though, I have more emotional investment in Cloud Continent not crashing down than I did the entirety of Tokyo potentially blowing up. So I think they've succeeded in something here. Yeah,
I think as a spectacle, it makes it's a good intimidating threat. It's a very natural problem. It's like, okay, you have a floating continent.
Yeah.
What if the continent doesn't float anymore? Everyone's at risk. At CR McRae said, I may be wrong, but this has got to be one of the most brutal fights in the franchise. Wargreymon got impaled through the chest and ripped Mugendramon's head off. Then they blew him up and did not see them get away.
I'm a weakling, so I don't think too much about how brutal fights are most of the time. I do know my friend recently finished Cross Wars, and she was actually commenting on some of the fights, being like, would the classic series have gotten away with this? So, like, apparently she was commenting on, like, the brutality being more enhanced than it used to be. So I honestly can't super comment on that. I will say, though, they definitely didn't feel like they were holding back during the portrayal of that battle. So, I mean, like, as far as, like, impact, they did a pretty good job there.
Yeah, I think in terms of, like, the brutality of what Wargreymon was doing to Mugendramon, I think they kind of, like, it's to me did not read as being that brutal because Mugendramon is so explicitly a machine. Like, I think it's similar to when what was the name of the giant? Was it Cannon Beamon? When Cannon Beamon's head fell off, like that's something that would have been, like, extremely horrifying if it was more humanoid, but because it was presented as being like a giant robotic base, it was like, okay, a little bit awkward. But since Machinedramon is like so robotic, I think it was kind of okay in that sense. Yeah, I don't think they ever would have done this kind of thing with a more humanoid Digimon. But I mean, we did see a lot of bow damage on Wargreymon, which was pretty brutal. I
was curious whether this counts as a Draymon Destroyer kill, because that was how they took care of him back in the original series, because the claws are supposed to be, like, specialized against destroying anything under the Dramon type. So that's how, like, he was able to slice him so easily in the original series. I can't tell if this counts or not, because part of it with his one of his arms got, like, knocked off too. So, like, I had to actually, like, discuss this with my friends. Like, does this count? I'm not sure if this counts or not.
I mean, because, like, the final attack was the spin with a remaining Draymon Destroyer, right?
Right. So it was like, does it count?
I mean, also, I guess when do you count the kill? Because, like,
right.
is Mugendramon alive in the end? when it gets like overridden by Vedamon? I don't know. Well, at Thousand Lions said, this was an episode where they clearly had no money to spend, but the animation did their hardest to make the fight as cool and intense as possible. I give them a lot of credit at how much they cared to do Mugendramon justice, especially after how Adventurer completely wasted him.
Okay, so this is something I know a weirdly lot amount because I'm friends with fan artists. But the animation director for this episode, Naoi Masahiro, is a veteran who was on the original series as well, and among a bunch of other Digimon series as well, including Atmon actually. So has been on it for quite a long time. And this director has an actual trademark style of not keeping the characters very on model, but having really fluid animation. This is a consistent thing on every single episode that he has directed. And actually, it was to the point where, like, I was watching episodes of Atmon. I hadn't even seen the staff list, and I would see, like, certain characters have a certain, like, way their faces were drawn, even though the character designer was completely different for Atmon. I would watch this, I'm like, this is a Naoi episode, isn't it? And then I would check the credits, and of course it is. And so this is actually something that is very consistent with this director. I don't know if it was a budget issue as much as this is kind of just what his priorities are. But yeah, it probably did a lot to service why that last battle was so climactic, I think.
Yeah, I would never say that like the episode clearly had no money to spend. I think that's kind of a reach, but like I think what stands out to me is that like I don't think there's much that's like extreme Sakuga moments in this episode. Like
I mean, Toei in general is like unfortunately kind of like that, and especially because this is one unfortunate thing I've been learning as I've been checking the staff lists for the series, is that there are episodes where there will suddenly be like animation directors, and there's like 11 animation directors on the same episode, and so half of them are outsourced, and the days that this happens exactly when Japan has lockdowns. So I am going to say like this seems to probably be a low priority anime for Toei at the moment because of like, and like I don't think they're like doing what like Mappa does and like literally poaching animators off Twitter. It does seem like they're getting like certain like outsourced directors that they're like confident with, but like at the same time it's like this is definitely a thing that is happening. It's not happening on Dragon Quest or Precure, and unfortunately I do think this anime is kind of taking the fall, especially so far. But at the same time, like Toei animation quality is very hit or miss.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's especially with Japan's response to coronavirus, like bouncing, back and forth, and like, yeah, like I can't even track of like when they've been in more quarantine and in a more heightened state of emergency, and
like it's not like I'm explicitly keeping track of it, but like I have kind of like the approximate like times in the back of my head because usually it corresponds to like when something else I was interested in kind of got like delayed because of it or something. So like I look at like the list of like the episodes, and there's like certain points where it just like escalates all the way to like 11, which is like having 11 animation directors on the same episode is like but yeah, unfortunately I do think that is going, and I do feel like it may be impacting the writing as well.
Yeah, I think it seems inevitable that, I mean, there's a lot of production background we have no idea about, but like with those kind of things introducing more restrictions, like it's always going to be harder to write the more restrictions there are. So yeah, it seems it would be like an absolute miracle for these kind of conditions to not impact it. And unfortunately I don't think we have holy Angemon's light in this world. But yeah, I'm also worried that like things are only going to get worse as Japan has to kind of pretend to be ignorant of the coronavirus before the Olympics and like pretend that everything's okay, and things are terrible and can't even convince people to take the vaccine in the US where it's widely available, and other countries can't get it until like the end of the year, and oh god, okay, sorry.
we're all frustrated, it's okay.
Next comment from Dak and Jackster. They said, decent fight, and they mentioned that the samurai side chop that Aster mentioned before was really badass. They also said, but it would have been cooler if they actually developed Tai's connection to Mugendramon, and mentioning like, does he blame himself for its creation? Is it a shadow of his past recklessness / trauma / violence? Is it a hard A or a soft A? God damn it. One of those questions is unambiguous in Japanese, though.
Yes, it is always a hard A in Japanese. There's no such thing as a soft A in Japanese.
There is, like, if you've heard the word toei is not written with an A. It's EI. So.
Although, funnily enough, I have seen like Japanese like people like pejoratively write it with like a to and then a literal a sometimes. But that's just as a joke. It's just a joke, yeah. But yeah, I think, as I said, he doesn't even remember it. So plot mandate wise, he's not, it's kind of like one of those where it's just like he doesn't remember it, so it's kind of hard to like, unless he like magically remembers it. Yeah, I guess they could have gone in that direction, but like he's like, he doesn't remember it at all, so like Yamato's the one who remembers it. Taichi's not the one who does.
Yeah, and like even if he had remembered it, like this is not the kind of show where like they have not represented him having a bunch of recklessness or trauma or violence.
No,
so, like,
actually, he's less reckless than the original one. The original one was a little like on the like do the first thing that popped into his head kind of person.
Yeah, so I don't know. I could see like 20 years from now, people revisit this episode and they're like, "Wow, did you realize it's like a metaphor for Taichi like reliving his own trauma and recklessness?" And it's like, okay, like I don't know. If people want to read into things that aren't, I don't think really there, it gives you the opportunity, I guess.
I do think it's funny that like the first so-called dark evolution in the franchise, like with like Taichi and Skullgreymon, because I always thought it was funny how like people keep associating dark evolution with like something that involves like you have to completely lose your head. But in the original series, it was just him being a little stupider than usual. So it's like it wasn't actually that big a deal back then. It was actually the after effects of it was actually more of a big deal than what caused it. Because it was just Taichi being like a little like, okay, if I throw myself into the line of fire, nothing bad will happen, right? Like, so I guess in that sense, it was a pretty direct. It is your fault for being reckless, which is one of the few unsubtle things in the original series.
Yeah, I think in like when you lay it out like that, like I think I appreciate that more like that less binary view that like when Takato and Masaru have their dark evolutions, and it's much more about like
completely losing it, really.
Yeah, like completely losing it, but also like doing something that's like unambiguously evil with a capital E, kind of.
Yeah.
I appreciate that Taichi is just like battling his own recklessness versus battling his own evilness. Because like as a as a real person, I don't really have to wrestle with whether I'm capital E evil, but I do have to wrestle with having Taichi's attributes,
Yeah.
But they both have their merits.
I mean, yeah, there's good and bad, and I have a slight essay about that for a later question. So,
So at Rabid Millenniumon said, "I thought Wargreymon was going to use the Mugendramon claw as a sword and become Victor Greymon for a second." that would have been cool.
No electric field stuff.
Yeah, it needs to be struck by something and then randomly evolve, or just have Edamon playing music in the background.
That too.
At Oriken Alphamon said, "I can't believe the series had the balls to kill Taichi. I know Tri did this and it was revealed he was still alive, but this time he's actually dead, you guys. This is as big as the nuke scene in Modern Warfare. The hero of the story is dead."
And I don't think they realistically expect anybody, kids included, to think he's dead. But I mean, even as a not that I like remember clearly what it was like when I was 12 or younger than 12, but I didn't watch much TV before I was 12. But I don't think I ever realistically thought that these kind of swords were going to kill the protagonist. So I don't know.
Yeah, I'm really curious, like, what kind of thought process goes behind crafting scenes like this, and what kind of, do they expect that, like, 50% of people are going to be tricked, 50% aren't, or, like, do they assume no one's going to be tricked, and it's, like, just exciting, even it's not going to trick you? I'd be curious to hear any kind of, like, thought process behind crafting scenes like this. And sorry, we did get a couple other questions this week, but we need to breeze past them, so we're running a little bit long. But Andy Lucas OE said, "On topic question, will Millenniumon be able to speak in the future, or will he be an unrelenting feral force? He speaks in the WonderSwan games, does he not? Explaining his affection/relationship with Rio."
Yes, I believe he does. I honestly don't know what this one, because it really depends on the framing too. Because like clearly the Vadermon are talking, so it's not about, they're not like above like making him talk, but like also like depending on how they resurrect him, what's the results of that, like what form it's going to be in, is kind of difficult to make a call.
Yeah, I think if I were to bet, I would say that if it's just going to be like Mugendramon combined with a Chimeramon or something, and it's just like that, then no talking. But if they do a thing like absorbing Devimon, like
that kind of thing,
if they absorb the Vatamon, and then they might talk once they've absorbed the Vatamon or something. But then Andy Lucas OE's off-topic question: which Vital Bracelet Digimon without an anime debut do you want to see first?
I think it would be nice to have a completely different anime with all the Vital Bracelet Digimon. I'm still kind of holding on for that because it'll be something original. That's kind of my take on it.
I wonder if that would work well as a I'm forgetting the name of it, but like the way Pokemon has done like short original net.
Oh yeah. That's also a possibility. Pulsemon is cute, so
yeah, Pulsemon is a very good mascot.
Yes, very good.
Very good, safe choice. Could really appear anywhere as like the brand ambassador for the Vital Bracelet.
Yeah.
Kazuchimon, I think, is my favorite though. Very cool design. At Arikamon Alphamon asked, what do you make of this Digimon 2020 is the worst anime of 2020 article that's made the rounds? I've definitely been negative on the show, as have others. I don't think it's as good as the original adventure, but worst seems too far.
Yeah. So, okay, if you have been following my previous appearances on the show, you probably, know this if you know me well enough, but I don't particularly like overly hyperbolic evaluations of things. Especially with like journalism, I understand the need for like, rankings and that kind of thing. And so like, I get it. I'm not going to say like it's bad to do this, but like personally, I'm just not a big fan. And I think I'm saying this partially because I watch Nichiyasa Kids Time, which is basically Precure, Super Sentai, and Kamen Rider. So they all have like a lot of similarities with Digimon in terms of like being like character focused, kind of like transforming hero kind of shows. Digimon itself is like sometimes considered like a spiritual aspect of it, but like the problem is that because it constantly goes on hiatus all the time, it's like you have less to compare it with. But this kind of thing happens a lot. It will divide their respective fan bases, and I think the closest comparison I'm making is, and I am so sorry to all the Precure fans in the audience who are probably going to kill me, but Smile Precure aired right after the Tohoku earthquake, and they specifically made it as something to make kids happy. That was like, they explicitly said that was their like MO with it. And it has probably some of the least character depth of any Precure series, even currently to date. And it's a really, really shallow, but it is extremely over the top and very fun. And a lot of people said things like, like it made me happy, it cheered me up. And like, I think when you do media criticism, you do have to think about like the purpose, the audience, how people makes it feel. Like, I think this is kind of an odd situation because we have, of all things, like we have the fact it's using the adventure name value on it, which makes it difficult because you're constantly inclined to make comparisons. But at the same time, we did establish like a whole like 2 cores ago that like this is not trying to copy the original that hard. I don't like think it's a bad thing for popcorn entertainment to exist, fundamentally speaking. So it's kind of like the 2 cakes question, I think I think that another comparison I can make is 2 years ago, I was meeting a friend in Japan, and we were talking about mobile games. And this was like when like Grand Blue Fantasy was like in the midst of like the What Makes the Sky Blue event. So like everybody was like talking about it on Twitter, and she was like retweeting things because she thought it was hilarious. But she does not play Grand Blue. And I asked her like, "Are you not interested in playing the game?" And she said, "It's interesting, and I like the characters, but I'm not a gamer. And it's too complicated for me, and I'm playing Fate Grand Order right now because yes, I understand the system completely sucks, but also it's easier for me because I can't handle complicated games." And it's kind of like, you think about like audience appeal and like just the fact that like, if you want to talk game system, I think most people would say that Grand Blues is better by a long shot than like Fate Grand Orders. And I hope I'm not offending anyone by saying this, but like it does make you kind of think about like the reason for like audience targeting or like what purpose you're trying to fulfill. And if you want to ask me what I prefer, I obviously prefer like the super nuanced stuff that Adventure have because like you don't get that everywhere. But I think especially when you have 7 series of like Digimon TV series before this that were like very different, obviously it makes it very difficult to make this kind of comparison because it's like, oh, it's shallow, so I don't think it's like good. But at the same time, I have a friend who said I'm enjoying this more than Crosswords and Savers, and like it's not necessarily a question of like, is it deeper? If you ask them, they're going to say no, it's not, but at the same time it makes them happier. So it's just like, okay, is it just a question of detaching yourself from the original? Is it a question of taste? Is it a question of like what your priorities are? I don't want to call it heartless or soulless because like I don't think like the level of like intricacy that goes into certain things like the action scenes is something you can say if you're completely just like running the mill. I don't think it's necessarily trying to look down on its audience per se. I mean, I guess I also have like strong feelings about like if you're if you're like not treating kids with like enough gravity. But at the same time, sometimes even adults just want to have fun too. So I don't really know. I think I also like have been thinking about how it's the polar opposite of the original series. And the original series did have a certain problem that I think is it was not clear enough about certain things. And I've especially started talking to this with like friends after I started appearing on this podcast. But the question of like why everyone seems to read the characters so differently, despite the fact that it's known for character development, and it gets even worse when like the dub differences are introduced. And the problem is that like the original series was like literally the opposite on Show Not Tell. It doesn't explain anything at all, and you have to figure this out by yourself. And I mentioned this last time. If there's a character who's not honest about their feelings, you have to use the context clues to figure this out. Even when they are honest, they don't summarize what the issue is, or they say it in one line in the entire series, and you hope the dub translated that right. And like, I think the worst case of this is it takes 84 episodes for someone to say what Takeru's problem is. 84 episodes over all of Adventure and 30. Wait, no, not 84, 88 episodes through like all of Adventure, over half of Zero Two. It takes that long for somebody to outright say, "Hey, do you think it's a problem that Takeru is like usually nice most of the time, and then sometimes he gets angry for like no real reason?" And, like, this has been happening since Adventure, but they don't say this. And if you haven't been like catching on to this, you're just gonna be like, if you can't figure it out, you're gonna be like, "Oh, well, it's inconsistent character writing, or it's convenient," or like you're gonna say something like that, and then like everybody's gonna like have differing opinions on how they read the characters because they didn't say it explicitly. And then like the crests don't actually help you that much, because like how many people still didn't get like the fact that like Hoshiro was supposed to be about like curiosity and not about how much he already knows. And then you read the production notes when you're like, which I had to do a lot when I was working on zine work, and they do say it like there, but they don't say it in the series. And it's like, I have to like constantly question myself, like, am I just like reading into this too much? And then I check, it's like, no, I'm not reading it too much. It was actually there. They just didn't say anything. And then like you add the extra layer where like multiple of these characters have something on the level of like, it's easy to do it when it's for other people, but it's hard to do it for yourself. And I'm like, do you even get this until you're like midway through high school? And it's like, it's got so much depth to it, and I almost wonder if it's too much. Like, this is a little overkill. Like, I don't want to underestimate the kids, but at the same time, like, this is why we're like here 20 years later still debating on what the original characters were in the first place.
I think, yeah, one big like divergence in how this series handles things is that it's like, what it kind of reminds me of, this is kind of a stretch, so maybe I can tie it together as I think about it live, but like it reminds me a lot of the way that Wikimon, the Digimon wiki, is presented, where like I think of Digimon as a franchise I got into because of the characters, my love for the characters, and the monsters were kind of secondary.
Right.
But Wikimon is like foremost like an encyclopedia of the monsters.
Right.
And because that's the kind of stuff that's more easily catalogable.
Yeah.
Like you can get all the profile information and like put things in verbatim and like list where they appear and all this stuff that's like very there's not like nuance and contradicting like readings and things you need to read into, because I don't even know how, like, that seems like such a mess to like have articles where you're like describing character motivations if there's nuance and conflicting interpretations, like,
yeah,
that seems really complicated. But so this series feels like the kind of show that appeals to that kind of like, I just want to see all the monsters, I want to see them presented like, oh, these new monsters that have been in the franchise for 2 decades but never been animated, but now we get to see them, like, I don't know, so it kind of like, this feels like a series for that kind of like, I just want to see all the cool monsters.
And I know people who are like are like currently very satisfied with that. It's not to say that this audience doesn't exist, and in fact these are the same people who have been complaining about like the original Adventure for being too slow. And or like, you even got a comment earlier that like the feeling that like Adventure didn't do Mugendramon justice because he was like killed so easily, Yeah. And it's like, I don't think the original series was a plot kind of thing at all. And, it was definitely more about the characters. And even the character, like, writing itself, I think, even though I said just now that, like, so many people often don't, like, understand what it was saying because it was so obtuse at times, they kind of intrinsically understood there was something. And maybe, like, several years later, they come back and look at it and they understand it now. Whereas, like, here we've kind of, like, in this case, we've kind of wondered if like how many people are going to be rewatching this, but at the same time, it's like, again, school of writing,
But yeah, I think like for my own personal enjoyment, like I know I've been very critical and frustrated and disappointed by the show at various points, but I think there is a lot of fun in discussing. Like I'm still excited for new episodes to come out. I'm just excited to talk about it. I think, compared to other seasons that I would like rate much better, much higher in my personal enjoyment, like Atmon, like I think this has been a more fun thing to experience with the community week to week.
Right.
Atmon, like I was following along with as it was coming out. I wasn't podcasting about it, but I was following along with it, and it was really fun seeing all of the hardcore Digimon fans that were talking about it as it came out. But like, and it's a little bit different because that wasn't being simulcast, so like there wasn't a legal way to watch it in English. But like this, I really enjoy how the Adventure, like it does feel like a lot of people who like had a cursory interest in it because it was Adventure and hadn't really watched any other Digimon stuff have fallen off. But there's always the potential. They come in, and they're like, they hear about some hype thing, and they just like watch that one episode and dip back out. But like there's more crossover and spillover, which is I really enjoy.
This is something I encounter a lot in like a lot of the media, that it's because I work with like fan artists a lot. That's like what kind of like my specialty. And one thing I notice is that it's not always the so-called best things that get the most fan work, because sometimes something is so well defined you don't have anything to contribute. Like this is the part where like a lot of might shock a lot of people, but Crosswords actually like almost completely tops how much doujinshi gets like made in like the Digimon sector. It's like super popular among like doujinshi artists, because I think the general like consensus when I ask people about this is because it had really strong concepts, but it also left just enough like unexplained so that like the actual like fan work people could come in and like fill in the rest. And I have seen this with like other like game series I like, where there was like one where like I'm not gonna name it because I'm gonna offend people, but there was one where there was a game that like literally almost killed the series financially because it sold so badly and the critical reception was so bad, but the doujinshi convention for that was like the biggest on record. Like there's a very like different like nuances to like how you enjoy your media and what you get out of it versus what is so-called the best thing.
Yeah, I guess like kind of on the flip side, back to the like the question about like the Digimon 2020 being the worst anime 2020 claim that's been passed around. Like I've had certainly had periods where I've felt like it was the quote unquote worst. I would maybe say that at the moment, but like that doesn't mean like it's garbage and like everything else is terrible, or like it's terrible compared to everything else. It's just kind of like my personal frustration in the moment, like.
I mean, I don't want the series to keep writing series like this. And I also would be a little blunt about saying, personally, based on my personal taste, this is probably the one I'm least likely to rewatch once this is all said and done. But at the same time, it's not like I'm still not at the point where I think spending the half an hour every week on this has been a waste of time. And I especially don't think being on the podcast talking about it has been a waste of time, given how many times I keep coming back. So
Yeah. And I think one thing I do want to address about the question is just that like not to like, because as the question came in, they didn't mention where they'd heard the worst anime 2020 claim, but like
I still don't know what it's referring to. Just a disclaimer.
I think one of the big places that put that out there was an article at Anime News Network that so I think there's like three things to keep in mind about this, because first of all, like editorial organizations are not a monolith, so even when like a gaming site gives a review for a game, that's one journalist's opinion on the game. Like it's not saying here's our definitive take and here's the objective rating. Like no one believes in objective ratings anyway. And second point, that article that was the Anime News Network's like worst anime 2020, it was explicitly framed about being several nominations from various critics, each of them explaining the reason for why they personally felt like that one show was their worst anime 2020. And so like
personal nomination, it was just like, this is why I said, like, I even said when I was like first beginning my answer for this question was like, I understand why these kind of like poll things exist. I'm not saying like they shouldn't. Just because I personally don't like, hyperbolic evaluations doesn't necessarily mean I like don't understand why like this kind of editorial is like, it's like fun anime community bonding,
Yeah, like I think it's good, and I think what's bad is the way that it gets repeated and regurgitated as Anime News Network said the worst anime 2020 is Digimon, because that's not what they said.
I think, especially because Anime News Network has multiple journalists, and I think like people need to kind of get that to their heads. And it's like, there are some who are like better experts on certain things, especially in regards to kids shows. It's also very hard to find journalists who know it like the back of their hands the way the actual fan base was, because I heard Shaman King's also having like issues with this as well right now, because they're not like part of like the mainstream anime circuit that like a lot of these editorialists are expected to keep up with, and I don't think that's like something you should hold against them, because like you think about how much stuff they got to keep up with every day.
Oh yeah, I think it extends to all kinds of niche entertainment beats, because like I think a very similar contention comes in video games when it's like it might have like a long running series, and who reviews the latest entry in that long running series? Is it the person who is the most experienced and loves all those games and like devotes hundreds of hours each entry in the series, or is it someone who represents the newcomer opinion? And like I honestly feel like, if gaming sites had infinite resources, they should probably do both. Have one for the long-running fans and one for the new potential newcomers. And they just can't afford to do that, so they have to make a choice. And that sucks, because someone's going to be upset by that choice. And I think that's kind of the same dynamic with covering series like Shaman King or Digimon, where it's like, I think there's a lot of value in people who, and I mean, if anyone listening to this show, like I get a lot of guests on who don't have tons of encyclopedic knowledge about the series. And,
which I think is an important perspective, by the way.
Yeah, so like I think both are important perspectives, and it's a little disappointing when I see people be like, well, they don't know everything, so it's trash opinion, it's not worth listening to.
Hey, would you know I've had the most success selling Atmon to people who have never touched the series before.
Nice.
I should say that. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, I think on one hand, I don't personally like hyperbolic opinions on one hand, but on the other hand, like I think like when you see things in this context, you should not take it too seriously.
Yeah.
Or personally, I guess is the better way to put it.
Yeah, I think it happens because people, like, information gets lost along the way. Like, I think most people, if they looked at the original Anime News Network article, they'd see, I mean, it was that blurb was written by Chris, who's been on the show, been on the podcast multiple times, and like he has nuanced opinions. He like, even in that blurb, he was saying like, this is not the objectively worst thing of the year. It's just my most personally disappointing thing of the things that I'm regularly watching.
As a fan of the original as well, right. It was. I remember that part. Yes, it was very personal.
So I think like most people, if they actually read the source, would agree with it, but then it gets repeated, like whispered on a lane like 10 times, and then it's like, oh my god, they hate Digimon. It's like, oh my god, I hate them too. Like,
no.
Yeah, I guess main conclusion is have empathy and nuance.
Yes, nuance, very important thing to have, very hard thing to have in the modern social media world.
Yeah. Well, on that note, on the note of nuance, do you have any closing thoughts with the episode before we get into ratings?
None in particular. Like I said, I think I'm kind of interested to see what the next episodes are going to hold. That's going to like influence a lot. Yeah,
I think particularly it'll really inform how I feel about the ending of the episode. But I think overall, like I really enjoyed this fight. It was well executed. It just gave so much weight to Mugendramon and made it a very intimidating battle. Like, I could see how on paper it has a lot of similarities with stretches of the show that I found really frustrating, like fighting like those fights in Tokyo against what was even its name? The
Nidhogmon?
Yeah, Nidhogmon. Yeah, I was like, I remember it was a Norse name, but I can't remember. But yeah, like in the sense that it's kind of empty or hollow. It's just like a big, like there's not character beats or emotion happening. But I think they've actually done a decent job making us invested in these characters recently,
right?
And building up this hype as like, like we've actually been. I guess like when Devimon came out of nowhere, and I felt like, oh well, this isn't.
It's just an adventure milk, kind of like feeling.
Well, I feel like it kind of like, because it felt like it came out of nowhere, and because most of the kids weren't there. There was something about that felt kind of like frustrating. Whereas this, I feel like, it feels a lot more earned, if that makes sense.
I definitely feel like the second core was the weakest, because it was seemed to be mostly like more spectacle than literally anything else. But currently, they do have like, they are building up things. They're treating us to like characters and like that kind of thing. So like I said, one of my biggest criticisms of the Tokyo episode is like, what are you going to lose if you fail? That's a very important thing if you want to have actual stake. I think they did a much better job building that up here.
Yeah. So I think I'd rate this episode. I think I'd give it I think I'll give it a 3.5.
You know what? I'll go along with that. I don't feel like I can give it a 4, but at the same time, 3 feels too low.
Yeah, like
it wasn't super middling. It definitely executed on like several aspects, but I don't quite feel like I want to put it on 4 yet.
Yeah, I feel like part of me was sold on the hype and the emotion of it enough to give it a 4, but then I look back and I'm like, Taichi told him to leave before he even knew the limits of Greymann's power, and then basically just sacrificed himself by not getting off the rocket. and
Quibbles.
those kind of things poke it down to a 3.5 for me. And for my MVP, I think I definitely have to give it to Mugendramon.
Yeah, just for being awesome. I really am looking forward to my friend's opinion on Mugendramon. I have to wait until next week because they don't have premium Crunchyroll.
Oh.
But we'll find out next week.
But yeah, next week is going to be episode 50, The God of Evil Descends, Millenniumon. And
quite a title.
Yeah, can the children overcome their sorrow and prevent Millenniumon's resurrection? I guess it should be clear from that description that like that kind of like we're probably not gonna have time for like them reflecting on whether Taichi died or not. Like
it's probably not going to be nearly as in depth as Adventure, but we've already established that like just by the sheer existence of the series. So, I did notice they are putting special attention on Hikari. Like if you look at the episode preview, like there was that scene with like her carrying flowers.
Mm-hmm.
So they look like they're gonna go a little like deeper into her thought process and like the so-called emotional reaction instead of just kind of like I am accepting like anything between like the level of adventure to all the way up to at the very least. Well, guess he's dead. We're gonna have to move on now. Like having some degree of grief is acceptable. But yeah.
Yeah, I guess I'm curious like how soon I'll come to a resolution with that. Like, I guess if I safest bet, probably like at the end of the episode, there's some tease that like they see some glowing light, and it's like, oh, is that glowing light Taichi?
Yeah, we'll see.
It'll be curious to see how they like. I think spend an episode fighting Millenniumon with the 7 out of 8 of them.
Yeah,
yeah, lots of different ways it could go. One thing I'm particularly curious about is there was a shot in the preview of I thought it looked like Chimeramon's head.
I did not catch that. I may have to check it again after recording this. I am not sure if
that might have been in the extended preview on YouTube.
I will have to check. Yes, I did watch that, but
it wasn't like ambiguous. Like the eye was closed, but I was like, it looks kind of like Chimeramon's head. And yeah, I'm not sure. I don't feel like they've set up how. Also, wait, did I say next episode is episode 50 because it's episode 49?
49.
Anyway, but yeah, we've gotten an explanation from Mugendramon. I don't know how they're going to introduce Chimeramon last minute.
Well, I mean, they did say they were scanning everyone's data, so like if the natural conclusion to that is they put all that data together.
Yeah, and there was one scene right of showing like Kabuterimon on a screen and Greymon on a screen, and like So yeah, they have the parts. They have the parts,
including Metal Greymon's hair. I'm sorry, I'm gonna be beaming on that for the rest of.
The real twist would be like, and they just pan to another screen, and it's Ken who gives them the idea, and is like,
oh my god! I think. Oh no, it's gonna be Akiyama Ryo. That's the better part. That's the even better plot twist.
Well, yeah, I'm excited to see how this all plays out.
It is interesting.
Yeah. All right. So, Aster, do you have a piece of media you want to recommend to listeners?
Lately I've been getting really into Iconic, the soundtrack orchestra's Digimon orchestral rearranges of evolution themes. I will link it to Jeff later. But
all in the show notes.
They are very nice. As someone who personally has struggled with being a musician in a niche genre who can't remix anything into it because of it, I extremely admire their ability to make like the electronic synth rock stuff into like orchestra.
Cool. And I'm going to recommend a resource that I think would be really valuable for anyone who's trying to learn Japanese. It's a podcast called Nihongo with Ako. If you're searching for it in your podcast player, you might need to actually search. I don't think that's spelled out in Romaji. Yeah, I think you need to actually search for Nihongo in kanji and Ako in hiragana. But what I find really surprising about it is it's conversations entirely in Japanese that are actually fairly comprehensible and understandable to people at the JLPT N3 or N4 level, which is something that I found like I really struggle with finding resources that are like engaging or that are simple enough for me to understand but still engaging, and this strikes a really good balance. And like even in like having Japanese teachers and class lessons before and stuff, it's always been really rare to have a teacher who can speak entirely in Japanese in a way that's understandable for learners. So this is really, really cool. And they regularly have different guests on who are also Japanese teachers, and a bunch of them also have their own podcasts. So like you kind of get exposed to a whole web of various resources, and yeah, very, very recommended. So yeah, I think that brings us to the end of the show. This episode of Padages was brought to you by giant turtles. Everyone knows giant turtles are the industry standard for surviving deadly vortexes without explanation. But did you know that they also come with mysterious ancient castles free of charge? Pre-order your giant turtle today. You never know when you might discover you've been living on a floating continent and randomly start plummeting to an ocean for no reason. Last week's Digiprompt was, what completely non-threatening Digimon would you want to see as a mob boss, and how would they make themselves look threatening? And my favorite response came in from Dak and Jackster. They said, a Bodemon on stilts, posing as a wise man. He talks with a precocious kid's voice, but no one seems to notice. And I did not realize until I looked into this, like, Wisemon just looks like a Bodemon head. Like, you could totally, the Bodemon could just pretend to be a Wisemon.
That is true.
And this week's Digiprompt is, what character in all of Digimon do you wish had valiantly sacrificed themselves, and when? I'm not sure how this is going to go, but yeah, think of a moment in Digimon where like you wish the character had just
died instead.
Yeah, I guess, or like made a big dramatic sacrifice and saved the day.
I don't think I can answer this question.
Maybe not as morbid as like, oh, I wish they died.
But it feels like that to me.
Kind of, yeah. I don't know. There wasn't much meat on this episode in terms of like questions I could think of. So,
well, I hope people come up with creative things.
Yeah. We'll send those responses or general feedback to podages@gmail.com, to @podages on Twitter, or in the episode comments on podages.com. And share the podcast with your friends who make a huge deal about how much they sacrifice themselves, even though everyone knows they're just going to show up like normal next week.
Or maybe the week after. I don't know about next
week.
But...
That's true. Might be 2 weeks. Might be 1 week off. Might be taking a rest for a week. And it would be awesome if you leave a review on Apple Podcasts. It only takes a minute, and each review helps a ton. If this is your first episode, don't forget to subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever else you find podcasts. So, Aster, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's always fun. And if people want to find more of you online, where can they check you out?
All right, on Twitter, @LessJL. You can find me there.
Awesome. And I am Definitely Jeff on Twitter, and also in my general anime podcast, we're going to be doing episodes on Backflip and Odd Taxi this week. Neither of those is that related to Digimon, I guess, but they are interesting anime. And thank you everyone for listening. I'll be back next week to talk about episode 49, The God of Evil Descends Millenniumon.
Dun dun dun.
Bye.
Bye.
And remember, never stop Digilove. Okay, so you had thoughts about the titles for?
We ended up actually discussing it in the podcast anyway, so we don't need to. It was the concerns about Hikari and her Brocon. that was what I wanted to say. But we already got that in, so I don't need to worry about it.
Okay. Yeah, I kind of like. I think I skimmed the synopses at first, but then I tried to like block it out of my memory because I didn't want to like
think about it. Yeah, like the part that they were putting special attention on her got me like really nervous. But then like they also said Mimi gets special attention too. And then I think what like eased me like most was like the looking at the episode preview, and then like it was like her holding flowers and stuff, and I'm just like, okay, this seems more tasteful.